Our speaker for today received his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from Utrecht University in 2009. In 2013, he graduated at the Ghent University for the Swine Specialization course. From his 12 years of experience in the industry, he has published and presented several papers in various international conferences focusing on gut health and enteric solutions. Currently, he is also a resident of the European College of Porcine Health Management since 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a round of applause for the Senior Global Technical Manager for Swine for Boehringer Ingelheim, Dr. Rutger Jansen, for his presentation, Redefining Gut Health, Healthy Gut, Healthy Pig.
Hello, my name is Rutger Jansen and I'm the Global Technical Manager at Boehringer Ingelheim, and I'm happy here to present you the presentation Redefining Gut Health, Healthy Gut, Healthy Pig. In our talk today, we're going to discuss about the role of the intestines and ileitis in particular, and also some benefits for oral vaccination, but also benefits beyond the vaccination itself in checking for change of microbiome, also difference in side effects, and we will end with a summary. Now, the gut is probably the most underrated organ. As vets, we're clearly focused, of course, also on lung health, but also over the recent years, we know more and more about the intestines. And also related to the intestine with the gut microbiome, we know that a healthy pig stimulates also healthy growth, and this starts within the intestines. And the microbiome plays also a pivotal role in the well-being and the behavior of pigs. And for instance, we know more and more and we learn more and more about the interaction between microbiome and other diseases, but for also like behavior of pigs like tail biting and cannibalism, which can be due to disturbed microbiome. Now let's check on, for instance, on the small intestines. And when you take a further zoom of the intestines and the mucosa and the structures of the mucosa, and then we end up then here to the crypts and the villi, and then focusing on the individual epithelial cells with the microvilli on top of this, then you can see that all of this is just increasing gut surface for about 6,000 times. And that applied for the full length of the intestines on 20-25 meters. And this is all done to have better enzyme production and enzyme digestion in this way of the feed, which is digested by the intestines, and to process this and to convert it at the end into growth of the pig into pork. Now, Lawsonia can disturb this digestion, and it's a gram-negative bacteria. And however, the disease caused by Lawsonia is already described in the 1930s, so in the last century. Only the Koch postulates were fulfilled in 1995 by Gordon Lawson, Connie Gabbard, and Stephen McOrest. And prevalence is estimated to be about 50 to 100% in swine farms worldwide, and it's the most common cause of enteric disease in the growth finishing stage in North America and probably even worldwide. Now let's check on the Asian and global prevalence. And when we check for ileitis, we can see clearly, and this is one of the BI data sets with over 4,000 blood samples, over 240 hertz. But what you can see in here that the disease is slow spreading. So it's not like influenza hitting the pigs at once, but it's slow spreading through the herds, and to end up about 80% of the pigs at slaughter rate to become positive. Now, the consequences can result in damaging of the intestinal wall. It can be observed with lower feed intake or a drop of average daily gain of a rise in FCR, and also on some occasions increased mortality can be observed. We know that this is a global spread of disease. More or less 100% of all farms worldwide are affected, and the amount of animals which are affected depend a bit from report to report. But you can see also cases in Europe up to 80% positives, Korea 100, Japan 86 positives. But also when we focus more on Southeast Asia, with Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Taiwan, about 80 to 100% of the pigs affected and it's the same situation also in the Americas. So it's truly a global prevalent disease. Currently, we keep following and monitoring finishing pig health on ileitis, and over the last years, in 2022 report, we saw a reduction in China on heavy pigs, which in China before were about 80% positive. Probably this is due to the ASF crisis, which has caused for, of course, for culling and repopulation of finishing pig herds with increased hygiene. But we also estimate when pigs come back to a normal production rhythm again, that also this will go back into an 80% positive. When you check for the other various regions, the trend for finishing pigs is quite the same. It's about 70 to 90, 95% of positive pigs, even higher positivity in gilts, and also stable high percentage of animals, for instance in sows, but also about to 75 to 95% positive animals. Now, ileitis, the infection itself, and we know most from challenge experiments. And the infection route is quite simple. It's ingesting by the mouth, and the infection comes out at the back end. And the ilia, you can see here, the intestines here, this the lining, which you have the crypts in here, and especially Lawsonia infects these cells here in the crypts. And it uses these cells as a breeding chamber. And Lawsonia needs cells which are in mitosis, which are dividing, to stimulate and to grow itself. And it cannot grow in free intestinal content. It needs these cells to multiply. Now, the first growth starts about 12 to 36 hours after infection. The first growth occurs. And then after about 5 to 10 days, we see the first proliferation. So we see a more thickening of the intestinal lining. And this is more or less maximal thickened about 3 to 4 weeks post-infection. And you can see that the total architecture of the villi in the crypt is gone. And also cell differentiation is also down-regulated. There's less enzyme production, but also the mucosa cells, the goblet cells, which are in a healthy gut, they also lost presence. And as a consequence, with low mucosa production, also other pathogens like E. coli or Salmonella can affect and adhere more easy into these Lawsonia-affected intestines. So it makes the pigs more sensitive for other intestinal diseases as well. Healing can occur for about 4 to 6 weeks after infection for the majority of pigs, and some pigs will remain in this stage and then become this wasting type of pig that you can observe. Now, mostly known from challenge experiments, and this is the work from Roberto Guedes at this time at the University of Minnesota, and he did a challenge study with pigs of 5 weeks of age. Pigs were challenged with Lawsonia intercellularis after culture, so pure culture, not a homogenate, which can also contain other pathogens, but this was with a pure culture. And the challenge was done by gastric tube. And the amount of challenge was 4.37 times 10 to the 9th. Now, this 10 to the 9th, this is a very big number. It's huge. If I would give a webinar now in 10 to the 9th seconds, this would mean that we were talking to each other for about 32 years. So this is a crazy big number. In the study, a lot of samples were taken, blood, feces, and necropsy. Now, this is an example of 11 days after challenge. You can see the first thickening of the mucosa and the reddish of the lining. And then after 15 days of challenge, we see more and more severe effect in intestines. And there's clearly a pseudomembrane or fibrin deposition here in the intestines. Now, 24 days after challenge, it even gets more severe. And you can see mainly the biggest difference here in the intestinal wall is white, whitish appearance of the intestinal wall. And this is clear necrosis of the intestinal wall. And also extensive necrosis of the superficial mucosa observed in here. Now remember this picture also for the next table that I will show you regarding the shedding. So for this table, I'll focus on the PCR results you can see in here, and these are the days after shedding. you can see there are positive PCRs on day 3, a bit of intermittent shedding, and this is just the challenge material coming back out the end of the pig on the intestinal tract. Then still there is no shedding till day 5, day 8, so it's about 1 week of negative pigs, and then we find consistent shedding on day 11, 15 and 19 after challenge. However, when you think back on the last slide with the severe superficial, the severe necrosis of the mucosa on this pig, and it was at 24 days after infection, there is intermittent shedding. So there's no consistent shedding at this age point. And even when we look further on 29 and 35 days, that also shedding becomes intermittent. Now, of course, we realize that this is a challenge experiment, and we know exactly where the individual pigs are depending on their time of infection. However, when we translate this data to the field for you as a veterinarian, what does this mean for you? We do not know what for the individual pig or for the pen mates, what was the time of challenge when they took up the infection. And also that in field conditions, the challenge is not 10 to the 9th as in this experiment, but it's 10 to the 3rd, 10 to the 5th, maybe 10 to the 6th. So it's far less. And this also then is more or less the explanation why it's so hard to use routine PCR testing to find Lawsonia. And when you're already with a very high challenge and a very high likelihood of finding negative samples, this is also the case for the field situation. So you need a lot of PCR on random sampling to find the presence of the disease and to prove infection. And this makes diagnostics not so easy regarding for Lawsonia. The ileitis itself, the forms of the disease, we have subclinical PIA, porcine intestinal dermatosis. It's more subclinical, so you cannot clearly see what's going on in the pigs. And the farm, they complain about reduced average daily gain, feed conversion has been increased. When you check for the intestines, you can find some positive colored immunohistochemistry in here, but it's hard to select a pig to run necropsy. And especially when it's truly subclinical, you cannot select one animal, for instance, with diarrhea. It's very hard to prove this form. But economically, this form of the disease has a high impact. Now, the chronic PIA, this is a bit more easy to diagnose since we have wasting pigs. Now, of course, we have the diseases of swine are full of diseases which can cause wasting, and Lawsonia is one of them, but at least we have a pig that we can identify. So you can run necropsy, you can check for lesions in the intestines, you can do some histology or PCR testing, and when these are all positive for Lawsonia, we can be quite confident that this disease is caused also by Lawsonia. I think the most easiest form to diagnose is the acute PIA or PHE, the hemorrhagic entropy or hemorrhagic enteritis form. And when you open those pigs, you can clearly see this bloody content of the intestines. And also these pigs, they shed digested blood, so it's a black tarish diarrhea. And most of the farmers, of the producers, can recognize this type of smell by the iron-like smell of the feces. And this type of disease, more or less, it occurs from about, let's say, 70, 80 kilograms onwards. So the pigs are about 150 days of age or elder. And also breeding gilts can be affected by the syndrome. But this is not always present in a farm, and it can come and go. However, economically, both of these forms are the tip of the iceberg, and most of the damage is due to this subclinical ileitis. And we have these forms present, you can be confident that a lot of pigs will suffer from subclinical ileitis as well. Now, we also know that there's a seasonal influence of ileitis and PHE. And when you look at this graph on the Dutch Animal Health Service, GD Deventer, you can see with increased summertime, so the line is the temperature, but you can see then clearly when the temperature increases, also the cases of necropsy with PHE result increase as well. It's happening in this summer, it's happening in the year after, and it's happening in the year thereafter. Now, one of the things behind this might be heat stress. Also, some researchers think that also new cereals with anti-nutritional factors can play a role, for instance, in the new wheat harvest. But we know for sure that heat stress is playing a role in the leaky gut syndrome. And most we know from heat stress from just heat stress experiments. For instance, in this case, heat stress and compared to thermoneutral, so 35 degrees Celsius for heat stress compared to thermoneutral 21 degrees, and that applied for 24 hours. This resulted in a rise in endotoxins in the heat stress group, which you can see in here. And these endotoxins, they come from the intestines. Usually you get a leaky intestinal syndrome, and those endotoxins come into the bloodstream. And this can cause then also for increased inflammation, mainly when there is, for instance, a subclinical infection already present in the intestines. The hypothesis could be that due to this heat stress, you get an overkill of the immune system, resulting in this bloody diarrhea aspect of PHE. Still, we need to learn more about this, but heat stress for sure plays a role in PHE. Now let's check on antibiotic reduction experiences, in this case the Netherlands. And we've seen the Netherlands with a reduced reduction of antibiotics. And this shallow green line is for pigs, so the antibiotic use in pigs in 2007, 2009. And from that point on, antibiotics use were reduced with about 70% to nowadays, 2022. And you can see this clear reduction in antibiotics. And it's all species that are reduced, but of course today we'll talk more in detail about pigs. Now, what has this resulted in? And when we check for this antimicrobial increase, this is reversed by reducing the antibiotic use. And we can see this both in pigs as in pork. So this is antimicrobial resistance. The several classes of antibiotics are here below this line, but you can see that for most of these classes, when the use of antibiotics is reduced and started in 2009, that the trend for these antibiotics is that resistance goes down. This is from pigs, E. coli trace organisms from the feces. The same is observed from pork, so from pig meat, also E. coli trace organisms, and also in here that the trace organisms found in pork also a reduced antimicrobial resistance pattern for the various antibiotic classes. The same pattern, but it's a bit more complex figure than for the multi-antimicrobial resistance. You can see the colors, the more upwards you get, the more resistance strains we have. So for several more classes of antibiotics, up to resistance for 9 classes of antibiotics here in the orange bar on top of this. And what we can observe in here, that we're still with high antibiotic use, we got more and more resistance, so less blue, more of the other colors present. And then in 2009, antibiotic use was reduced, and we can see a reversion more or less of the figure. So becoming more and more strains sensitive for most or more classes of antibiotics. So a clear reversion of antimicrobial resistance with the reduction of use of antibiotics. And this is quite important for the future to keep using antibiotics to treat animals and both humans. And then you might think, if you reduce these antibiotics, how did they do this? How did they cope with this? And in an inquiry of the Wageningen University amongst a group of farmers, how they were able to reduce the antibiotic use, one of the first indications, the most called indications, to use more preventive vaccinations. Of course, also reduction of routine use of antibiotics, so the unnecessary hurt treatments of antibiotics, and also replacement with more and more with vaccination to a preventive approach. Also some others, it's not vaccination alone, also improving hygiene, better feed quality, more health checks and so on. It's a combination of measures, but vaccination is one of the most important ones. Now, when we check then for the productivity of the pigs in the same period and check for 2005 to 2017, we can see that even with using less antibiotics, we were able to use the genetic potential of the breeding companies, of the animals. So we're able to wean more pigs per sow per year, still increasing up to 2017. And also when you check for the finishing pig performance, for instance, like the average daily gain, that increased, and also feed conversion ratio decreased, so more efficient production of pork. despite that we reduced the antibiotics, we could still improve the production by mainly so more preventive vaccinations and the other measures. And also important to realize with if you use a lot of antibiotics, and this is then focusing on tetracycline consumption, that you select also, for instance, for Salmonella typhimurium resistant types, and this is in a Danish study which indicated when you have a significant increase of tetracycline consumption, you get a strong association with tetracycline resistance, and this can for the future be also a problem for human foodborne infections by pork consumption, since Salmonella typhimurium is one of the most important cases of foodborne illness after consumption of unwell prepared heated pork. Now let's check on the economy of ileitis itself. And when we talk about economy, you also need to talk a bit about sustainability, because these two go hand in hand, and feed conversion is one of the main metrics behind. So the majority of cost price of production, of course, is feed, and one parameter is, of course, feed conversion ratio. And when we check for future sustainable pork production, this requires a low FCR. Because with a low FCR, we have a better economy of production. We use less raw materials to produce 1 kilogram of pork, for instance, less soy, and also the health improvement for the key sustainable production. It could be disease eradication, but this for Lawsonia intercellularis has never been succeeded worldwide to keep a herd negative for Lawsonia. They all got reinfected on a short course of time, and this leaves us then for vaccination. However, we also would like to do this without a structural use of antibiotics, also to keep the antimicrobial resistant development down and to reverse this evolution as well. Also, FCR improvement, it gets more and more important. I think all of us are aware of the situation in the Ukraine and how this affects global feed and energy prices. You can clearly see the increase of a more or less doubling of the feed cost over the last half year when compared to the past, where yes, there are some fluctuations, but the feed prices have never been as high as they are today. Also, when you check for the feed price as component for production cost of pigs, you can see also the effect when you check, and this is British data, and you check for in red, the red bars are the feed cost, that nowadays feed costs are close to 2/3, maybe even a bit more nowadays in 2022, make up 2/3 of the cost price by feed. And then we have some others like the buildings, maintenance, labor costs, and so on. But 2/3 of the production cost is caused by the cost of feed that we need to purchase to feed our pigs. And when we translate this to a finishing pig, and we know that a finishing pig consumes about 250 until 300 kilograms of feed, but depending on the feed conversion, and this is for the growth from 25 to 100 kilograms of live weight. So feed is the majority of the cost price of production. So feed conversion as a consequence is also very important in cost price reduction if you want to work on that one. And most farmers are not so aware of the feed conversion ratio itself, but I assume that most of the farmers will focus also on cost of feed per kilogram of growth. And of course, feed conversion itself is the main metrics behind it. And especially now with the current high feed prices. Also, average daily gain can be important, and this is the case with high margins, because if you have high average daily gain, this will just mean we sell more pigs to the slaughterhouse, and this will only make sense when you make decent money out of the pigs. And otherwise, you can better focus only on the cost price aspect of production. Now, when we check, for instance, for Lawsonia, and this can affect about, let's say, 0.1 FCR unit to raise a finishing pig, and this is about 10 kilograms of feed per pig affected. So this is one bucket of feed, but it's a wheelbarrow per pen, and when you do the calculation, what it means for a farm over a year, these are truckloads of feed that are increased in use because of Lawsonia intercellularis, resulting in suboptimal production of pigs and suboptimal use of the feed ingredients. Now, this is work done from Ingelheim and Nicholas Gerber from Iowa State University, checking on what's going on in this Lawsonia challenge pigs and how does vaccination then, an oral live vaccination, mitigate these effects. So we have a positive control group. These are non-vaccinated and challenged. There's a negative control group, not challenged. And there's a vaccinated group, and these are vaccinated and challenged. And when we focus on the difference between the vaccinates and the positive controls, or the challenge, however, non-vaccinates, we're seeing that in the vaccinated animals, vaccinated with an oral live vaccine, that the average daily gain is improved, that also the feed intake of the vaccinated pigs is better, and also there's a better feed conversion. This is in this example explained as gain to feed, which is the opposite of feed conversion. And when this number is higher, it means there's a more efficient growth pattern. So there's more growth of the 1 kilogram of feed intake. There's 440 grams of gain instead of the 360 grams of gain in this example to the left. Also, when we checked on lesion length, non-challenged pigs compared to the vaccinate, quite in line with each other, and there's a clear influence of the non-vaccinated pigs by the challenge, about 130 centimeters of lesion length in these group of pigs, but there's far less lesion length in the vaccinated pigs. However, a difference in lesion lengths, there's not so many difference in shedding. When you compare, for instance, the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated challenge pigs, you can see the onset of shedding of the first 2 weeks is quite the same, and that there gets a difference about 21 days after challenge, that you see lower challenge in the vaccinated animals. However, also in line with the weather study, in the field, when we observe our finishing pig farmers, we'll never know when the individual challenge took place. And this makes it hard, for instance, to interpret also PCR shedding and to evaluate in this way vaccination of pigs. And you can better in this way focus on the sort of technical performance like average daily gain and feed conversion. Now, what I show you now is an meta-analysis that we published recently on the Lehman conference, analyzing 38 studies done globally around the world and to check their effects for vaccinates and non-vaccinates on the economic performance. And the first slide I'll show you is the reduction of FCR, feed conversion ratio. And in this study, we've proven the effect reduction of 0.08 units of feed conversion, and this equals to a feed saving of 7.5 kilogram. And for the current market prices, that means with a vaccination, you can save 228 Philippine pesos. Now, the same we observed with an increase, a significant increase of average daily gain after the use of an oral live vaccine against Lawsonia intercellularis. And when we do the economy of this one, we need to know how much money we earn on a pig. And in the example here, I calculated the cost price. So first is the feed effect of 8,500. That's the feed that we need to feed a pig, bringing it to slaughter weight. We also need to purchase a starter pig, the value of a starter pig. That's also a component of the cost price. And then we have the payout of the slaughterhouse. And at a revenue at this moment of 120 kilograms of live weight, slaughter payout would be 28,000 Philippine pesos. When you take these, the cost price of feed and starter pig off this revenue, we have a positive growth margin of 13,750 Philippine pesos. Now, if the baseline growth is 650 grams, you can divide this 13,750 by 650. Then we have the economic value per gram of growth, and you can multiply this with the increase of 37 grams, and this will result in a positive outcome of 783 Philippine pesos due to the oral live vaccination increase of economic performance of the pigs. Now you can also do the same calculation on also mortality, and again on this meta-analysis we show a significant reduction of 0.78%, And to calculate the impact of mortality, we need to estimate the value of this dead pig. For this example, we made the assumption of a dead pig dying at on average of 70 kilogram, but this can vary from farm to farm. So we need to calculate first the part of the cost price of the dead pig is the value of the starter pig. Then we increase this with the feed consumed to bring it from 25 kilogram to 70 kilogram, and this is about 4,000 Philippine pesos that we need. So total cost price of this dead pig, 10,550 Philippine pesos, and you can multiply this by the mortality reduction of 0.78, and this equals then in the return per vaccinated pig of Philippine pesos 82. Now, the total adding up the numbers, benefit of vaccination, average daily gain, 783, FCR, 2028, mortality, 82, a total of over 1,000 Philippine pesos. Now, you can multiply this by the pigs produced per year, but you will end up on the current market circumstances with an ROI of 15.6. Now, some additional facts. Already explained to you that there are multiple interactions with intestinal health and also with oral life vaccination. Because Lawsonia destabilizes the intestinal health, the technical performance, mortality, but it's also a door opener for salmonella infection. And with oral life vaccination, you can regain intestinal health, but you can also stabilize intestinal health and get salmonella under control. Now, one of the studies behind this, and this resulted recently also in a European label claim of the oral life vaccine having efficacy against salmonella. So you vaccinate against Lawsonia intercellularis, but we can have demonstrated efficacy against salmonella typhimurium as well. And what you can see is here the difference in those two shaded lines. These are pigs challenged, double challenged, co-challenged with Lawsonia intercellularis, but also with Salmonella typhimurium. And this group was additionally then protected against ileitis by oral life vaccine. And you can see the area under the curve, there's a significant reduction in Salmonella typhimurium shedding when the pigs are vaccinated against Lawsonia intercellularis. Now, what is the mechanism behind this? And this is the microbiome changes. So when we compare the two groups, so co-challenge with Lawsonia and with intercellularis, and the one group is vaccinated and the other group was not vaccinated against Lawsonia intercellularis, and we check for the vaccinated pigs what happened, we see a difference in microbiome changes. So all different species, some species less, some species more, so a clear change in microbiome, but the functional changes are more or less in this cluster. And this cluster is an increase of Clostridium butyricum due to this live oral vaccination. And this Clostridium butyricum, this is a very beneficial fermentative bacterium, and it ferments feed components, and by fermenting this, it produces short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids are immunomodulative, immunosuppressive. It a bit controls the negative effects of inflammation, which is driven by Lawsonia, which is driven by Salmonella, because they like a bit of inflammation to grow themselves. But also the short-chain fatty acids, mainly butyrate, downregulate Salmonella pathogenicity. And also butyrate is a very important nutrient for enterocytes. So this is more or less the explanation that with a changed microbiome due to this live vaccination, that we also have an effect on controlling Salmonella. This is also proven under market circumstances on commercial farming. And in this example, 4 farms are compared and in their Salmonella antibody status, which they are obliged to monitor from German farms. It's from the German quality system that they have to monitor the Salmonella status. And when you compare the black dots, the black bars, are the Salmonella antibodies before starting with oral live vaccination against Lawsonia, and here the reddish bars are the Salmonella antibodies when the vaccination against Lawsonia intercellularis live vaccine was applied. So it's a significant reduction in antibodies. also an improvement of their antibody status for the governmental monitoring of the herds. But beyond of that, there's also, again, an improvement in average daily gain, so also resulting in faster days to market, but also when compared to the oral live vaccine, you also see in here a lower mortality. So higher average daily gain and a lower mortality in these groups as well, combined with lower salmonella antibodies. Now we also know more from this is not only affected by Salmonella typhimurium, also one study behind with Salmonella derby excretion in oral live vaccinated vaccines, and in here two treatments were combined, either to prevent Lawsonia problems by the application of Tylosin, administered in the course before the challenge, the week before challenge, and the other group was vaccinated against Lawsonia intracellularis with an oral live vaccine. And now there were seeded pigs placed inside the pens, and then samples were taken for Salmonella derby shedding. And what you can see that after about 10-12 days after the seeded pig was placed in the pens, that the pigs which had a vaccination against Lawsonia intracellularis, a live oral vaccine, had significantly low shedding of Salmonella derby compared to the pigs in which Lawsonia was prevented with the use of Tylosin. So again, a confirmation that the effect of vaccination is stronger than the effect on antibiotics in controlling, in this case then, secondary controlling of Salmonella derby. There was less shedding of Salmonella derby, but also less lymph node colonization, so also less meat. If you would translate it, also less contamination of meat, the risk of slaughterhouse, and also lower Salmonella antibodies proven in this study due to this oral live vaccination effect. One of the last things to share with you is the impact of mineral adjuvanted vaccines on animal eating and drinking behavior. One study controlling 3 groups of 300 starter pigs, control, oral vaccinated, and intramuscular vaccine. And what this graph on acute phase proteins show you, if when you apply an oral live vaccine compared to the control group, there's no increase of haptoglobin, there's no increase of PigMap. However, the intramuscular vaccinated groups, these have a significant increased acute phase response with, in this case, haptoglobin, but also significant on PigMap. Now, what does this mean then for the pigs? And this is on the same experiment. Also, the feed intake of the pigs was evaluated, and this intramuscular oil vaccination, significant drop feed intake after vaccination, 50% drop the first 24 hours after vaccination, and also the feed troughs were not empty in the intramuscular vaccinated animals when compared to the controls and when compared to the oral live vaccinated groups. And the oral live and the controls on feed intake pattern were exactly the same, where you can see a clear dip in the IM vaccinated animals. You can also extrapolate this on a difference in growth, because if the pigs eat less, also the growth in the first days will be reduced. In a different field observation, we also observed the same. This was drinking water vaccination applied with a continuous pump, and the same farmer also applied intramuscular vaccination of the pigs. And when you check on the water intake, which was also monitored by room, and you can see them here, the water meters are in here, and so the water meter per room could be monitored. And with the application of an oral live vaccine in the pink bars was a clear increase of the water intake and a good growth of the pigs. But when an intramuscular vaccine was applied, there was a clear drop of the water intake, and it took about 5 days to come back on track on the water intake. The same is observed in a different study, which we compared different water-based platform vaccines against PCV2 and MHIO water-based intramuscular combined with an oral live vaccine. And the other group was a mineral oil-based group of the same antigens, also PCV2, MHIO, and Lawsonia. And you can see that the mineral oil group, they had a clear drop of the water intake, and it took them about 48. It's time in hours, but these are blocks of 6 hours. So there's about 48 hours of time difference between the start of the vaccination and when the pigs come back on track on the water intake. There's about a 2 days drop on the water intake. Now, it's not only important for your pigs to control the side effects, but also for farm workers themselves, since also mineral oil adjuvanted vaccines can have some serious side effects for farm workers as well, and leading to surgery in case of self-injections, which can lead to swelling to hands, but also to repetitive surgery to remove the mineral oil from nurse sheets and from tenon sheets to prevent long-term injury. And so take this also in consideration when you make choice for your vaccination program. So as a summary, ileitis has a global spread. Most of the farms worldwide are affected. It's a disease of predominant finishing pigs. Oral vaccination, it's very safe, both for pigs as also for farm workers. And there are benefits beyond Lawsonia when applying an oral live vaccine on the improvement of microbiome, resulting also in better control of Salmonella. When you evaluate your mainly focus on the zootechnical performance, for instance, like average daily gain, like FCR, like mortality, because in these threes, this is where your economic damage is and where you need to win back the investment of vaccination. And in this case, on the current market circumstances, and based on the assumption also that we have from the meta-analysis, it's an ROI of about 15.6 that you could expect. Thank you for listening, and I'm open for questions.
Proven protection made easy. Why oral live vaccination is best to control ileitis. When our researchers started to look into ileitis vaccination, they first educated themselves on the disease. Let's have a look at why they believe that oral live vaccination would offer the best protection available. Ileitis is caused when Lawsonia bacteria are transported to the intestine through fecal ingestion. Once in the intestine, the bacteria replicate and hinder the development of new cells in the mucosal membrane of the intestinal wall. This limits absorption of nutrients and water. Ileitis signs may often be mild or subclinical, which means the signs of the disease are not readily observable, even if pigs aren't suffering from the obvious diarrhea or increased mortality. They can experience reduced performance. Vaccination is key to preventing and controlling ileitis. When choosing a vaccine, you should first look at efficacy. Efficacy is affected by 1. The route of administration, and 2. Vaccine type. With intestinal diseases, the goal is to build immunity at the site of infection in the most efficient, effective, and easiest way possible. Since ileitis affects the intestines, it makes the most sense to choose a vaccine that is delivered orally. That way, by doing something as easy as taking a drink, pigs take in vaccine, which is then transported directly to the sites of infection. When it comes to vaccine type, there are live vaccines and killed vaccines. For ileitis, live vaccines are a pig's best option for 2 main reasons. Firstly, live vaccines cause the immune system to react in a way that most closely mimics natural infection. That way, they're more strongly protected when they encounter the pathogen later in life. Secondly, live vaccines elicit local mucosal immunity, which means they're building immunity right where the infection is taking place. The vaccine enters the cells in the intestinal wall, stimulates an immune response, but doesn't cause disease. And when the pig is exposed to Lawsonia in the future, the immune system is already prepared. If you want the best protection against ileitis, choose the oral live vaccine that's already proven it works in over 500 million pigs worldwide. Oral live vaccination. Oral live vaccination has set the bar when it comes to helping prevent ileitis, rather than treating the infection after it's already occurred. When vaccinating pigs for ileitis, it's a simple choice. Oral live vaccination. Proven protection made easy.